when is the end? When is the end after 3 years? I think that's the question. It's like, okay, temporarily, yes, we can cooperate, but after 3 years, and especially when the rest of the world, they have already walked out of this pandemic and we're still suffering here.
Right, let's return to the other big story on the front of the Times today. China protest, the biggest since Tiananmen, where we've been hearing these incredibly rare sounds. It's the sound of a protest in the financial district of Shanghai over the country's strict COVID rules, which have spread to several major cities. Police have been filmed beating some protesters and taking them away in police vans. Police in China's biggest city kept a heavy presence yesterday. It's after which is on Wulamuku Road, which is named after Urumqi, capital of the northwest Xinjiang region, and scene of a deadly fire on Thursday. The fire has become a catalyst for anger, with many blaming the COVID lockdowns for hampering emergency services. Well, just before we came on air, I caught up with the Times correspondent in Beijing, Didi Tang. I began by just asking her how extraordinary these scenes are in China.
It was like, how do you say, it was, let's say this, I did not expect this to happen on this scale. So in China, in the past, 3 decades, ever since 1989, the movement, got cracked down, right? Military bloodly. So the authorities have done everything to nip any kind of, nip anything in the bud if, any kind of mass protest or mobilization. So they want to make sure, that people cannot organize. They won't be able to go to the street, right, in an organized way. So this time we're not talking about one protest, but we're talking about a dozen. And they happen all over the country in major cities throughout the nation. And that's very rare. And we don't know how this got started. For sure we know the immediate trigger was the deadly fire in the far western city of Urumqi, when at least 10 people were killed in a fire in this kind of a residential tower, high rise. So, and people here, they blame those COVID control measures, for the death. They say, okay, because those people, the escape route was blocked, right? And then so they started to blame, they blame the exit, the COVID measures. And this is immediate trigger, but we also have to put everything in the context. Is after 3 years, people in China, they are exhausted. They're very tired. They say we have, in the first year in 2020, yes, we understood, it was emergency. We did not know, and the virus was very, very vicious. We were willing to cooperate, right? We give away some of our freedoms to cooperate. But after 3 years, especially when they saw other people, other countries opening up, and then we're talking about the World Cup in Qatar, right? They're seeing millions of people gathering without masks.
Did people in China not realise that the rest of the world had sort of come out of the pandemic, lifted restrictions, returned to certainly in the UK, essentially a pre-pandemic normal life? Is it all of these things together?
I think people started to realise this, right? Because they have friends, and obviously they see the news reports. And I think this time the World Cup in Qatar is really it's a stark reminder. Everyone else outside the country, right, outside China, is having a normal life. They're having a good time, a great time. You're talking about huge numbers of people, gathering in Qatar, right? You see those footballers, playing, and they're not wearing masks, right? You see the opening ceremony, and you see and then people you see the fans, and the World Cup is huge in China, so those footage is being live broadcast here, and people see what's going on there with their own eyes, and they say, look, what's going on? Why everyone else, outside the country is having a great time, and now we're sitting here, we're suffering, right? And then we don't have. One thing is the uncertainty, and then that comes with those control measures, because you don't know, you can be locked down anytime. And so people are very upset with that. And then they say, look, we want to go to work, and then our children need to go to school, right? Lots of schools, in Beijing, basically all the children now are taking online classes. And we're talking about after 3 years, why are we still doing this, right? In the first year, probably people could understand, we did not know much about the virus, but after 3 years, and then we're talking about, those control measures, they were even stricter. They are harsher than those in 2020. I mean, compared to 2020, the very first in the month of the pandemic, right? And Beijing was very, very quiet, but at least people were able to move around.
Yeah.
And then they were not locking down the whole, they're not like locking you up. Let's just say it like this. Like here, and then it's not one or two people, and then it's like it can happen to any of us. And then children are not going to school, right? And then people are not going to work. They have been asked to stay home, and then we're just like,
yeah.
When is the end? When is the end after 3 years? I think that's the question. It's like, okay, temporarily, yes, we can cooperate, but after 3 years, and especially when the rest of the world, they have already walked out of this pandemic and we're still suffering here.
And so, Didi, where does this go from here? Because clearly, to take part in these protests is an extraordinary thing and takes courage and bravery on the part of the people doing it. But it's not going to lead to China becoming a democracy next week. How does?
Oh, no, that's not going to happen.
How does the Communist Party respond? Where does this go next? Does it ultimately lead to them lifting some of these restrictions, or will it go the other way and actually we'll see an even more draconian response?
I don't think politically it's going to change. Xi is very much in power, and then he has all the authority. He has all the powers, and I don't think. I think he's going to be the last person who is going to push for any kind of political reforms. So let's not have that kind of fantasy. But pragmatically, I do see the possibility for Beijing to ease the restrictions.
That was Didi Tang, the Times correspondent in Beijing, speaking to me just before we came on air this morning. And we'll keep an eye on the situation in China. And, of course, Rishi Sunak would no doubt touch on it in his foreign policy speech tonight.